Hello.
Hi, hi Zanya, how are you?
Very good, Shivani. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's wait for the lovely followers for a while, and then we can
Yeah,
get started.
good, good. The audio is good, Zanya?
Oh. Yes, it sounds great. We
Yeah.
can hear you, and I think even the video is also okay. Good. So I have to say, still good afternoon or good evening in Malaysia. I think it is 5 p.m., so it's almost good evening, and good afternoon
Yes,
from Kurdistan of Iraq.
six, it's 6 p.m. here. It's 1 p.m. there, yeah?
Exactly. So very nice to see you.
Yes, it's nice to see you after so long.
After so long and many years, finally back
Mm,
through Instagram.
yeah.
Uh, let's get started. And first of all, I want to apologize about the last session. We didn't make it, but this time we are so happy to meet Dr. Shivani from Nottingham University. And sorry about the timing for our lovely followers and literature lovers. But later on, we uploaded the full discussion, the full video, and hopefully they're gonna watch it again if it doesn't work out for them right now.
Mhm.
Dr. Shivani, now there are people, uh, of course, now in Asia, specifically in India, I'm sure in Malaysia, and now even to Middle East, like Iran. I mean, they are familiar with your writing, your poems, and it's an honor to meet you and to talk about your process of writing and also about your uh, novel Yalpanam. But before we come to the discussion, I want to read something about Dr. Shivani's biography. Sivagurunthan has been writing and publishing fiction and poetry for 20 years. Her writing has always been grounded in a Malaysian context and supported by a metaphysical foundation. It combines the local and the concrete with the universal and the abstract, reminiscent of the South American magical realist writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Mario Vargas Llosa. In her first book, Wildlife on Coal Island, my favorite one, she creates a fictional island as a means to explore the Malaysian context in ways that non-fiction setting could not. The Indian writer Tapish Khair described the book as R.K. Narayan's Malgudi, turned into an island meets Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book in this highly readable collections of stories by a new and distinctive voice from Malaysia. It was republished by HarperCollins in India in 2012. Her second book, and the one we discussed today, is Yalpanam. So I immediately focus on the title. Later we're going to discuss that one too. Yalpanam is her first novel and was published by Penguin Southeast Asia last month. Her short stories and poems have appeared in numerous international journals and magazines, including Cha, an Asian literary magazine, Agenda, Construction, Literary Magazine, and many others. She currently teaches creative writing at the University of Nottingham and is working on her next novel, and you can't wait for that. When she is not writing or teaching, she enjoys long walks in nature and painting. I definitely with that one, and I'm sure you're really big fan of nature, and I can see your post is observing different things, small things, to create something different for your writing. Thank you very much. Dr. Shivani, we'd like to hear something about your novel, Yalpanam, and if you read something for us from that one, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zanya, for that introduction, and a big hello to everybody who's here. Thank you for coming and spending this time with us. It's really nice to be on this Instagram live platform. It's my first time, So I'm an Instagram live rookie. And a big thank you to Zanya and also to Charmo University. Is that the right pronunciation, Zanya? Charmo?
Harvard University, yes.
Yes, Charmo University for organizing this event. I'm very grateful. So as a way to begin, let me tell you a bit about my novel Yalpanam. Here it is. And then I'll read a brief excerpt from it. Okay, so the novel, in essence, is about revisiting, reclaiming, and liberating the past in order to inhabit the present more fully and to also open up a space for a more dynamic future. That's it in essence. So it's set in present-day Malaysia on a fictional island called Coal Island, the same Coal Island from the first book, Wildlife on Coal Island, with leaps back in time to 19th century and 1940s Malaya. So the story opens with Pushpa Naigi, the lady you see on the front cover here, and she's a 185-year-old woman, and she believes she's finally dying. On one level, and she's been a recluse for many decades. So on one level, she's very ready to die. But on another level, there are many things from the past that aren't quite letting her go just quite yet. And just as this is happening, her 18-year-old neighbor, Maxim Chia, who lives down the road, is on the brink of her own transformation, which somehow sends Maxim Chia up the road to Yalpanam, which is the name of the house that the old lady lives in. And this is quite a strange, almost taboo trip, because Pushpa Naigi is a recluse, she's a hermit. Everyone's gossiping about her on the island, she lives alone. But Maxim makes this brave, courageous journey. And basically, it's a potent mix. This relationship, this friendship is a potent mix because it facilitates great changes for both of them, including sending Pushpa Naigi back in time to 19th century and 1940s Malaya. So that's the novel in a nutshell. That's a hard job, to condense everything down into basically a paragraph. The passage I'm going to read from, it's from midway through the book. Once their unlikely friendship has found a kind of shape and definition. And in this passage, Maxim is sort of educating Pushpa Naigi, the old lady, on technology. So Maxim is showing the old lady stuff on her phone, which I thought was a fitting passage to read from on this IG platform. And it also highlights the kind of relationship that they have. So as Maxim is showing Pushpa Naigi what to do on the internet, parts of the past also get revealed as Maxim starts to Google things. Okay, so that's just a brief intro to the passage. So I will read the passage now. We call it the internet, Auntie. The girl finally looked away from the machine. Her eyes darkened, her eyebrows close to touching. She seemed troubled all of a sudden. It's a place, the girl continued, staring at nothing before her. I guess it's a place where people go to find stuff out and also talk to each other. Pushpa Naigi chuckled. Why go to a machine to talk? The girl shook her head. Strands of hair stuck to her cheeks and lips. She blew them away violently. It's not just about that, Auntie. You can talk to anyone, anywhere in the world. Her eyes brightened. A pleasant smile grew like the first bloom of a rose bush. I write letters to someone in America and we talk about everything under the sun. He likes to write about things like planets and stars, the universe, stuff like that. Ever since, she bit her lip and quickly moved a finger on the screen. The finger seemed angry, eager to travel up and down the machine as fast as it could go. Very nice. I see. People on the island can go to places they would never be able to go to otherwise. They can talk to people they would never be able to talk to. The finger stopped moving. The girl looked up. Her face glowed as though the eerie light from the machine had transformed into the warm embrace of the sun. Exactly, Auntie. You get to know more about people, what they do, what they think. Pushpanagi smiled. You show me first, child, then I will tell you. But I feel a person is more than what they do and think. The girl looked at some invisible spot in the air. She hemmed and hawed and finally said, as in, a person is more than what they do and think because they have feelings? Something like that, but also not like that. The girl threw a puzzled look at Pushpanagi. Her face collapsed into a frown. Slowly the frown smoothed out and the light around the girl shone again. It would be nice to talk like you. The girl obviously enjoyed the newness of their language, the fresh, exciting fact that having spent days in the same house, the girl could say certain things with ease because now she had the right. Talk like yourself. Don't let other people's shadow get mixed up with you. How would I know if the shadows are already mixed? You will do certain things. You will do things a certain way if the shadows are stuck to you. What way? I don't know. You have to find out. But there are so many people and so many shadows. That's the problem. The finger dipped down onto the machine again. It silently tapped on the screen. Once again, the blue light ate the girl up, took her away from the hall. Where did the light transport this mouse that didn't know it was a tiger? The girl felt so far away. In an instant, the blue light swallowed her whole like the python that gobbled up the poor rubber tapper on the plantation, decades and decades ago. Yalpanam, the girl said. At last, she looked up from the machine, eyes closed together, mouth shrunk back to its original shape, serious, as though at any moment now she would be talking about world affairs or about the level of pollution on the island. Pushpanayagi leaned forward and waited. The girl cleared her throat and read from the machine. The yal is a lute. In ancient times, a blind Panan lute player visited a king in Ceylon. The king was so captivated by the yal player's music that he gifted the blind Panan musician with land on his island. Soon, the lute player filled this new land with people from his homeland in India. This new settlement was called Yalpanam, land of the blind minstrel. Jaffna is a corruption of the Tamil word Yalpanam. Pushpanagi stared at the little machine, trembling in the girl's hands. The stone in her belly shifted, moved up, and settled in her throat. She pressed her hands against her chest, her heart beating loudly. Hare Rama, it was still regular like the metronome that used to sit on the piano in the hall. So many years have passed. I've forgotten this story, she said. I suppose you can say the yal player's music is in my blood. The girl shot a sharp look at Pushpanayagi. You came from this place, Jaffna in Sri Lanka, formerly known as Ceylon? Yalpanam, yes. Those days, long, long ago, the year I was born, the British had already been there for almost 20 years. All the names they changed. How many times they said, Yalpanam, Yalpanam, Yalpanam. Always they twist the words. They don't know how to say it properly. Maybe they don't want to. Yalpanam, Yalpanam. Suddenly they were calling it Jaffna. Pushpanagi stroked her chest. With no warning, the words had come like bullets flying through the air, but they were enough to take the girl away from the machine, to get the glow around her strong again. You mean all those years ago you were there? The girl looked at Pushpanayagi with eyes that seemed to long for something more. Deep in the darkness of the world she had traveled through when she had been asleep, Pushpanayagi had seen those very same eyes, lit by the sparkling flames of candles, wet from the tears of bondage. Pining eyes. Something about the glaze that covered the pupils made the eyes porous. Anything could enter them. Aching eyes. Blue eyes ached. Brown eyes ached. Down in the darkness of those worlds. Auntie, how come the machine knows so much? Pushpanagi studied the thinness of the object in the girl's hands. Earlier, the girl had tried to explain the magical appearance and disappearance of words and pictures. But the girl was too comfortable with this new magic. She didn't even know it was magic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shivani. That's interesting, and I love it. We don't want to go into detail about the novel because we have to read it, and I'm sure now it's all available in Amazon. Am I right? So now you can
Yes.
People can order now. But
Yeah.
we have to combine some questions in terms of processing the process of writing, and also some marvelous questions about Yalpanam. Now,
Yeah.
when I, for example, when I see the book, the first thing came to mind because I'm quite, I think, quite sensitive with titles. For me, Yalpanam is something. It is something quite significant for the book. What does the title mean to you, and why did you choose that word? It's something quite interesting. I'm sure everybody likes to get the answer. Why Yalpanam?
It's a good question. Thank you, Zanya. So the excerpt that I just read out gives the literal meaning of the word and the story behind it. It's the Tamil name of Jaffna, which is the homeland of the character Pushpanayagi, and it's also the homeland of my grandparents who left Jaffna or Yalpanam in the early 20th century. The legend itself I found to be very evocative, and I think it's very interesting when we look into the history of the names of places, especially if there's a kind of origin story around it. I myself had to do research for this since it wasn't a story that was passed down in my family. I mean, there were other stories that were passed down in my family, but that wasn't one of it. And so I myself had to do Googling. So I Googled and found out more about the name Yalpanam. And for me, this type of information adds depth and richness to a place. We sort of see the many layers of fabric, as it were, that make up the material of a place. And to me, that's very exciting, especially since place plays a big part in my writing. Like my first book, Wildlife on Coal Island, is very much centered around a place. In that case, the place was the island itself, Coal Island. And in this second book, I returned to Coal Island, but with a more specific emphasis on the space of the house, Yalpanam, which is the other meaning of the word in my novel. So when I was writing the novel, the naming of the house Yalpanam happened very spontaneously, very effortlessly. And now, when I think about it, I have memories of my grandmother, referring to her homeland as Yalpanam. And I suppose the word must have landed in my imagination, in a deep and most likely unconscious way. I think certain words have that kind of magnetism. They resonate with us in ways that carve, deep grooves in the psyche. And then they appear when they want to appear. And, of course, the word Yalpanam had great emotional significance for my grandmother. And so, I must have picked up on the emotional content as well. And on a deeper and also more conscious level, the naming of the house Yalpanam is a deliberate connector, connected to the homeland that was left. And it's very much a part of the diasporic imagination. So, Pushpanayagi and my family are part of the Sri Lankan, Tamil, Malaysian diaspora. And the transference of the name to the new land is a way of keeping some kind of connection alive, right? It's even if it's a connection that has inevitably, transformed by the sheer fact of migration. So it's a sort of, reimagining of home, really, a reconstitution of home.
I reckon it's quite symbolic. But the thing is, for example, when I published my novella, of course, in Kurdish language, not in English, to me, the title was first. I put the Chinese name, like Dong Shuyang, which is obviously a type of flower in China. But when you're writing the novel, did you already come up with that title, or after finishing or revising, then you finally decide that title?
Oh, yes, because this novel was actually called something else for a long, long time. It actually took me 8 years to complete. And in the first 7 years, it was called something else. It was actually called Touching Bones. And it was only when I had made many revisions and started to see what the essence of the novel really was that I realized actually this novel is Yalpanam. It's about Yalpanam. Yalpanam, the house, because everything is happening within that space. All the central events happen in the space of the house. So the title came later. Yeah.
Thank you. And now you've mentioned some of the names, the characters in Yalpanam, for example. Now it's curiosity. How do you create the characters? Usually we have names and then the characters with their personalities. So people, especially readers, they always wonder which one comes first, the reader or the writer, or the names of the characters or the personalities.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in my experience of writing, not just this novel, but writing in general, each character emerges in their own way. So, for example, the arrival of Pushpanaigi, the old woman in this book, it's still the most alive and vivid, it's the most memorable one for me because she appeared as a very vivid image. I saw very clearly in its eye the image of a large woman squatting in a garden. And the image was so bright, it was so compelling that I began to follow it. And as I followed the image, more images came. And then soon there was the setting of the house, and then there was the road, leading up to the house and so on. So the names of the characters, at least the primary characters, for me come almost simultaneously. So, as the images are unfolding, the names of the characters also get revealed. And, accompanying these images is a sense feeling. It's a feeling, almost like a scent that I detect and I experience it and I tap into it as much as I can. And I would say that the nature of the characters, they develops over time. And in the case of this book, it took many years, right, for me to see the characters as fully as possible. Their personalities and their character, they get revealed through the drafting process. The main thing, as I tell my students, all the time, is to feel the characters, feel the characters as much as possible and to connect with them.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you. And when it comes to the other literary influences, or let me rephrase the question, has Indian literature impacted on your writing as a writer? Well, before you answer that question, because when we talk about Indian mythology, there's some kind of we have Maharama, we have Vishnu, you have Shiva. These are all they have background in Indian writing and Indian literature. And there are some of the great writers even in Sri Lanka, like the one when you read the passage. I remember The Hungry Ghostess by Silvadori. He's a Sri Lankan writer. And Sahadatra, for example, is an Indian writer by Herman Hayes. The background, the characters, the places, for me, when you read the passage, I was almost, getting around with the same novels and characters, stuff like this. So anyway, the questions, because India, what I may say Sri Lanka, I mean, they are part of Asian literature. I mean, they have their own ways when it comes to writing and literature. So, is there any kind of impact on you in terms of writing?
It's really interesting that you say that. That's what it. When I was reading the passage, that's what it evoked in you. You were reminded of Sri Lankan writers and Indian writers. I would say that there's definitely influence, but I wouldn't say that it was a primary influence. I mean, there was certainly some influence, but there was also a fair bit of Western and Malay influence. So I'm very much a hybrid creature, exposed to Western literature and also to Malay literature, and of course also South Asian ones, South Asian literature. So when I was growing up, my mother bought stories, in magazine form that were imported from India, like Amra Chitra Kadai, Birubal stories, the stories of Rama and Sita. So, these were folk tales and also stories from sacred texts that were adapted for children. So this was a very first, introduction to texts from South Asia. Um, But alongside this, I was also, when I was growing up, I was also reading a fair bit of Malay literature because I was studying Malay in school and I loved to write stories and poems in Malay. So I would read books by writers like Usman Awang and A. Samad Said and also teen novels. I would also read actually books by like Enid Blyton in translation in Malay. And that was the Malay influence. And also because my father was an English literature teacher, I was also exposed at a young age to English literature, staples like Shakespeare and the Romantic poets. And I was particularly interested in Romantic poets like Keats and Wordsworth. And so when I was 15, I was writing these terribly derivative poems, trying to be the Keats of Malaysia or whatever, when I was young. But when I went to university, I started reading post-colonial literature, particularly when I was doing my MA at Warwick University. And that's when I really started to explore books from all parts of the world, particularly the Caribbean and also literature of the Indian diaspora. My PhD, as you may know, was on coolie indentureship, as represented in contemporary Indian diasporic literature. So I read lots of diasporic Indian literature and also, texts from South Asia in general. But I can talk in terms of specific authors or books that have influenced me. And this is where I feel that there's a range, you see. I can name some of these books, that have definitely made an impact on me, in terms of, literary influences. So books like the modernist novel Nightwood by Juna Barnes. There's the magical realist text by the Mexican writer Juan Rulfo called Pedro Paramo. I don't know if anybody knows it, but I highly recommend it. Also, The Moor's Last Sigh by Salman Rushdie, Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky, and also all the books by the Malaysian writer K.S. Maniam. And just in general, the writings of Virginia Woolf and also the Caribbean writer Jean Rhys, particularly White Sargasso Sea. But I also have to mention a few sacred texts that have made an impact on me, such as the Tao Te Ching and also the Ramayana.
Ramayana. Okay. Well, wow. In that case, is that called hybrid literature? Because you mentioned all from different countries, like it's Asian, like Russian, like Western. So, but for me, I think I have the same feeling, because now I'm quite familiar with Asian literature, even in Malay literature. Like Green is the Color is my favorite novel, and it's quite interesting. And I have read some other novels, if I can recall them right now. But then I moved to Chinese literature, and then Western literature is, of course, another part in my mind. So now I'm doing Middle Eastern literature. So it's like, it's everywhere. So I think by combining these all, I mean, you have come to a conclusion to write a book or a novel or a poem, whatever you call it. And then that's called a process of writing. And I'm sure every single process may have some issues, problems. So my question is, for you, when you write, what are the most common issues you face them?
The most common issues, I would say that in general, what I find to be the most challenging one for me, and that's a constant challenge. Like I have to keep keep myself in check is to stay connected to myself, in a deep way so that I continue to tell the truth, to keep calling myself out when I can sense that I'm not in my most authentic space. So basically detecting my own BS and calling myself out on it. That to me is one of the primary challenges. But, on a more practical level, I would also say that it's making the time to write, the time to write, particularly when I'm teaching. Which is nearly always impossible because, maybe this, Zanya, because teaching takes up, almost all of, your attention and energy. But, yes, but the good news, I love it, as I'm sure you do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it and wouldn't be so passionate and to even, organize an event like this, for example, right? So, but I feel that, teaching is also a vital part of who I am, just as writing, is a part of who I am as well. And I do find that teaching and writing complement each other. I definitely have learned a lot from writing, about writing from teaching, creative writing. Um, so those I would say are the primary challenges. Honestly, a lot of it has to do with finding the time. So, for example, right now I am working on my new novel, and I am finding that I have to put it aside because there isn't enough mental space currently to really sink into the world of my novel and to get to know my characters and to dream with them and to really connect with them. It's not so much, it's about time, but it's also about headspace. So actually, for this novel, I completed it in the version that we see it now, when I went on sabbatical. So my university was gracious and generous enough to agree to give me a sabbatical of 6 months. Essentially, it was 9 months, because we had the summer break. So summer break in combination with the 6 months of writing time, that made it 9 months. And that was wonderful because I could focus completely on the novel. And I had so much space, there was so much space to dream and to be creative and to just have that luxury of time to write.
Very nice. Well, I think when it comes to writing, some people, not the real readers, they believe that you can simply, write a novel or a poem, but actually, you see, now there are common issues. Now, as you mentioned, timing, now space ahead, and I think now, for me, I believe it's a part of, I want to be in a silent place where
Yes.
I can talk to myself, create the characters, the qualities, the names, it needs silence. So I think
Mm-hmm.
writing, like any other process, it has some kind of problems, issues, but and most importantly, if you work, for example, like teaching, that one, because when you're back home, I'm sure that will take you not half, more than your half of a day. So no more time of, resistance for the novels, for your book, for example.
Mm.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shivani. I'm really interested in the theme of spirituality, and to me, I think spirituality, when I was in Malaysia, when I was in China, when I was even in Vietnam, I read some of the writers. I think in Asia, generally speaking, spirituality, of course, not religion, because I think spirituality is personal. I believe it's a
Mm.
common theme in Asia generally, and I have not started your book yet, Yalpanam, but I believe there's some kind of theme in terms of spirituality. What does spirituality mean to you? And is that you apply it on your novels or poems or any other genres on purpose, or is something spontaneously comes to your mind, or the characters, the background, the setting requires to do so?
Mm-hmm. First, you asked me what spirituality means to me. That's a big question. And I agree that this theme appears in my work because it's been a deep interest of mine in a sustained way, for the last 10 years or so. And prior to that, I'd always been interested in metaphysics and philosophy, And So for me, spirituality is really a return to connection, connection with oneself, connection with the world. I think, we live in acute separation, very acute separation most of the time. And, some of us more than others, of course, but I think, it's clear that we all experience separation in one way or another. And, for me, like my personal journey was often challenged by depression and anxiety, and that forced me, it forced me to look at all the ways that I was suffering and that, brought that, and the ways that I brought suffering to others. And, each investigation into the source of the suffering led me to the same point. And that point was, I was suffering because I was disconnected and feeling separate in some way. So, this return to wholeness, to a state of non-separation, to me is the essence of spirituality and just life in general. Sometimes I don't really like to even use the word spirituality. I just say it's life, it's, the essence of a good, rich, wholeheartedly lived life. And this kind of worldview, it inevitably also finds its way in non-deliberate modes into my writing. So my characters also, they generally are seeking for meaning, they're seeking for belonging, they're seeking for a place to be themselves, they're seeking for, they're seeking wholeness, they're seeking connection. And a lot of my characters are deeply lonely and they're displaced. And so, often they're on journeys towards recovering a sense of wholeness. Yes.
Well, I believe that the art of self-realization, self-awareness, have been argued for centuries, and in many books, in novels. So that self-discovery, as you mentioned, from your journeys, it's a way back to, again, redefine yourself and then recover yourself again one more time. So I believe for Asian literature now, it becomes a common, I would say, technique. It's quite a bit difficult to say technique, but I can see it's quite common in Asian literature, and especially in India and Sri Lanka. But now, in one way or another, I can see even from the title, the cover of the book, and what I heard from you, again, spirituality works out again in your novel. My last question, we don't want to take your time, is that since you have that passion, that enthusiasm for writing, and of course, spending 7 years, 8 years for a piece of writing isn't that easy. So it needs some kind of commitment, passion, love for that work. What is a message? What are the lessons? Whatever. What are the lessons, the messages that we can get, or you got so far from learning as your career and your passionate stuff in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zanya, because I feel like I learned so many things from writing this book. I feel like this book was a great teacher. And the first lesson really that comes to mind is patience and perseverance, as you mentioned, right? It requires commitment, showing up. And as I said earlier, like it took me 8 years to complete this book and 10 years to publish it, because I was waiting for 2 years for the book to be published, because it was initially supposed to be published in 2020, but then the pandemic, right? The pandemic happened, and then everything was delayed, and eventually, it was like a 10-year journey to publication. And, I wrote the first draft not long after I'd written Wildlife on Coal Island, so that was like 10 years ago. And it was a period of great creativity for me after I'd written Wildlife. I'd been working very hard on my writing at that point, because not long before then I'd completed my PhD, and I felt like my creative expression had been somewhat muted. It had been muted and neglected, and I really wanted to write again. So I started reading lots of stories and books, as a kind of self-imposed training. And this worked, tremendously, to unleash stories in me that were waiting to be told. So after I published Wildlife, I sat down and I wrote the first draft of this novel, which I had named Touching Bones, right? So for 8 years, it was called Touching Bones. And, what's really interesting is that the first half of the novel really, it flowed really smoothly. And, but the moment I reached the midway point of the novel, I started getting shaky. And there was so much uncertainty in terms of where to go from there, right? And I did what these days I tell my students never to do, which was I tried to figure it all out. Like the second part, I tried to figure it all out in my head. So I tried to solve it like a Sudoku puzzle. Right? But of course, stories don't come from that part of the mind. They come from deep in the psyche, they come from the subconscious. And accessing the psyche is not always easy. It's that part of us that's mysterious and that's unknown. And, to access it, you've got to really use your intuition, and you've got to be patient, and you've got to know how to listen. You've got to listen to the subtle nudging of your own interior landscape. And, this most often takes maturity and also experience, both of which I was really lacking then, like 10 years ago. But what was wonderful was that I was attuned enough, with my instincts to know that there was something important here. There was something important in this story that I really wanted and needed to tell. And so I persisted. I was writing draft after draft, and I honestly do not remember how many drafts I ended up writing. There were so many changes and rearrangements and adjustments that were made, over the course of the 8 years. But what's interesting is that the primary elements of the novel remained throughout the draft. So the house, Yalpanam, for example, was a constant feature. Also, the friendship between the old lady Pushpanayagi and Maxim, the 18-year-old neighbor Maxim, also remained. And the characters from the 19th century also largely remained intact. But basically, I was really struggling to bring everything together. And it was really hard for me to locate the core of my novel. So in hindsight, I can see how a couple of things might have been in the way of gaining that clarity. One reason is that I struggled with getting to know the old lady Pushpanayagi. I mean, she was an enigma, right? She's difficult to grasp. I had no reference point for her. She was 185 years old and she was very mysterious. The character Maxim was much easier for me, to connect with, because I knew many young people, her age, and I was also an 18-year-old girl, at one point, long time ago, but still, I could understand her struggles to some extent. But Pushpanayagi, she felt really new to me. And I think the other reason why I struggled was that I just needed to grow. I needed to grow as a person and as a writer. And I do think that some stories take time because you have to catch up to them, as it were, in terms of your maturity as a person and as a writer. So there were life lessons I feel I needed to learn in order to make the imaginative and empathetic leaps that the novel was demanding of me. So, so that was the, perseverance and patience. And apart from perseverance and patience, I also learned a couple of things in terms of craft, the craft of writing. So one important thing that I learned was the vital importance of creating a structure, especially for a novel. Once I broke the novel down into parts, essentially I deconstructed it, I was able to get a much clearer picture of the whole story. And the other important thing that I learned is the importance of a good editor and good dependable feedback. So I actually worked with an editor who helped me to see things, in the novel that I would not really have been able to see, on my own. And I feel like this type of help it's priceless.
Shivani, I can't agree more. I love that way you mentioned sometimes you need to access your psyche, and for that reason you need, of course, a key. But sometimes the key is not, for days, for months. So you have to again research again, you need to find the key, and then to access again, and then to go again for the characters and the stories. And joining the scenes from the novels is quite difficult. Sometimes when you get lost, you don't know how to join back again the scenes all together. That's why I can see, in my opinion, that A poem, in terms of writing a poem, in terms of writing, is quite it's a bit easier than writing, for example, a novel or a novella. In terms of, I believe, in terms of setting characters and stories, because you wrote poems. That's why I mentioned poems again. I believe, like Wordsworth says, it's a spontaneous, powerful feeling. Like it comes, while you write a poem, it comes, and then you write, everything will be there. But when it comes to novel, it really needs time. Sometimes I don't know if it happens to you. For me, when I dream, sometimes in my dream I was a part of the character, and then I'm trying to solve the problems in my novella or in my novel. The next novel, my next novel in Kurdish coming out maybe next year. So it is. These are things, problems, issues, and we are talking about books and novels. Maybe some other people didn't see it in that way, but thank you very much for your time, Shivani. That's all I can say. If you have anything you would like to say, finally, we thank you so much for your time.
Just thank you so much for having me here. And if there are any writers out there who are maybe a bit diffident about writing or feeling like you shouldn't be writing, or somehow what you have to write isn't valuable or worthy, I mean, I know that this is a common issue because I meet many young writers and new writers, and that seems to be an issue. And I certainly had that, and at times I do still have that, is this worthy? I just want to say, don't worry about all that. Just throw that out of the window and write your heart out. That's my motto these days. It's just, write your heart out, write what you need to write, and don't worry about what anyone's going to say about it. Just tell your story.
Very encouraging. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank our lovely followers, friends, people, writers in our times. Thank you for your lovely highs and waving. Thank you very much. We are going to upload the whole video, and thank you very much, Dr. Shivani, for your time. It was quite an honor to meet you finally. And congratulations on your novel, Yalpanam, and I can't wait to read it. Well, thank you very much, and have a good time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.